It's time to take a ride on the crazy train. This is the most intense and complex of the 18XX games I'm aware of. 1817 may be more brutal from some things I've heard about it. I haven't gotten to play either of these. This one was on my want list, as is 17. Actually, they're the two that I ordered from Deep Thought. I was at number 98 after about 5 years. And some of that, I didn't budge at all. So I didn't know if I was ever going to get it. When I saw a copy of the old Chris Lawson version of this, I jumped on it. It's not the most modern version. It's not the greatest components compared to the new ones. I could have, gotten these guys laminated. I don't know. But I chose not to. And it might end up, I may have some tiny card sleeves that I could put them in. But, I wanted to get the chance to play the game. All right. I'm going to assume, first of all, I'm learning this. I've read through the rules once. I've read through this little fact sheet that Lawson produced for it once. I have a vague idea of what's going on, but not much. I have a lot of experience with 18XX, although I may not be a great player overall. I'm pretty decent at 30, but my favorite of them, 56, I don't know if I've ever won a serious game of it. Where everybody knew what they were doing, or most everybody did. Anyway, so don't expect me to necessarily get the play correct, certainly not the strategy, and even the rules. We may have some pretty serious screw-ups. But we'll try to do our best, because that's what this is all about. Now, what do we have? Well, we have Northern Italy, which has different borders in it, which will restrict play significantly. We have a whole bunch of different stocks, some money, which I have to count to make sure I have the right amounts. Here's the equivalent to the private companies in this. They're called concessions, and they work significantly differently. And we have some special kinds of spaces here. So these are not lots and lots of cities. They're mountain passes, which are places that you put a token and restrict access. By the way, I'm assuming a familiarity with 18XX, certainly, to even scratch on and try to take a look at this. And in specific with 1830, although you can probably follow along if you're familiar with anything in the 30 family, this is kind of in that family. I mean, it's definitely related more to that than to, say, the 1829 or 25 or whatever. And although it has some things in common with some of the real oddballs, it's like 53 down there. It's more like 30 than any of the other commons. Whoa! Okay, this is not something I was expecting. All right. Well, I just took the first look at the stock market chart, and I see this yellow zone. And if it's what I think it is, what I remember from the rules, I'm very shocked to see it there. Okay. First thing with the rule book. Wow, that's tiny print. How am I going to read that? Yeah, I've been having difficulty with it. Let's see how well I can handle it. I may have to get my reading glasses to cope with this at all, and that's going to cause problems. All right. So, the core of the game is the same as an XX. You have stock rounds followed by operating rounds, bunk, 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 right? Maybe multiple operating rounds between stock rounds. Outside that, they bother to define two new phases, which are kind of present in anything anyway. There's a concession round, which is like the initial stock round in a game of 30. And then they have the standings round, which is basically, hey, let's score the game. It's over. Okay. There are a bunch of options in this game. And I'm not sure where I'm going with the options yet, but I'll try to bring them up as I hit them. Some of them have been incorporated as standard rules in version 2, some of them not so much. In general, though, the version 2, I believe, can be played with the same rules if you want to. It's got a different map, but it comes with some overlays, or there are overlays available to return you to the original idea here. Okay, so the game starts with a concession round, which is an attempt to dispose of these concessions, which are not quite minors. The way you do this is you write down bids. There's a little chart. I got a sheet over here. Each player writes down a bid on each of the concessions. And the minimum bid on any concession, well, you're allowed to bid 0 on a concession. You're allowed to not bid. But the minimum bid on a concession is £20. And the sum of all your bids has to be greater than 0, which means you must bid on at least one of these. By the way, the game holds up to 8 in the full version, and I may be doing 8 players. Just to maximize the chaos and maybe the different, look at the different opportunities in a little bit more detail. Since it does actually handle that many players, I think I can kind of isolate, certain railways better that way. Anyway, each of these, you must put a bid on at least one by the rules. However, there's something kind of tricky. What happens after you write your bids is these all get handed in. They're sealed bids. This is where it's kind of like 53. And you hand them to, the banker, and he decides an ordering on those bids. And that ordering is going to be whoever has the most total money that they bid, followed by whoever out of, for tiebreakers for that, whoever has the highest bid on the first concession, second concession, etc. If people tie completely down the line, I think, you kill them. No, it's random. Okay. Then the banker checks to see if any of these sheets are in error. If they are, they're discarded as 0 bids, which means you can intentionally bake an error into your thing if you don't want to bid on any of these. So you're required to bid a positive value on them, on at least one company, a 20 bid. But, you could bid 1 on one company and you will have all your bids discounted. That's probably a terrible idea. You probably want to win one of these, but you can try to violate the spirit of the rules that way. All right. Whoever is on top of the stack gets the priority deal card, and then we'll be going around the board. Okay. Starting with the first concession, whoever bid the most money on it pays that money to the bank and gets the concession. Any that haven't been bid on go over into the bank pool, and they'll be available later. I believe ties are broken in the order of play, so if you were the person with the priority, well, no, ties will be resolved through an auction among the tied players. So if you tie, starting with the lowest number, those players are allowed to up their bids by 5 lira each, and the person with priority deal, who is kind of at a disadvantage here, he has to, I guess, make the first attempt to bid on this. I'm not sure what happens if nobody breaks the tie, but whatever. And then we have examples. There's a lot of examples in this game. I can't read them. Reading the rules gives me a headache. I kind of considered printing out the second edition rules just for avoiding the headache aspect of this. All right. So that's how these get disposed, but you don't know what they're good for yet, and it's not quite what you assume. Okay. During stock rounds, you largely can do what you can do in an XX stock round. First, you must sell any stock that you're going to sell. Selling stock means that you will not be able, for the remainder of your stock, for the remainder of that stock round, to buy shares of that corporation again. Standard stuff. You can't sell certificates, however, of a corporation. And the only certificates are the corporate certificates. These don't count as certificates. If it hasn't operated yet, if it would move more than half of the stock of the corporation into the bank pool, kind of standard stuff. Other people can buy stuff in the bank pool. Okay. When you sell stock, it moves down a level like it would in 1830 per share, or per certificate sold, not share. It's per share. But there's two types of companies in the game. There's the normal 10% share major companies, and then there's minor companies where the normal shares are 20% and the presidency is 40%. And you'll see there's an example of one of those. Okay. There are other distinctions between companies too. There's historical and non-historical. The major and minor is one of the big distinctions though. Okay. Then you're allowed to buy a stock. You're allowed to buy a concession from the bank for £50, which conceivably you could have gotten it for less during the bidding round, but only in the first turn of the game. You can buy a corporate certificate from the bank pool, or you can buy a certificate from the initial offering up here, and the money goes into the corporation's treasury. You can only do that if it's an existing corporation. You can't start a corporation by buying the presidency that way. And get to a moment, you'll be allowed to do that instead of purchasing a share, so it's really not that different. But there are some funky things with starting a corporation. Now, you can buy a concession from another player for any amount at least equaling 1 lira. You can buy a concession that's attached to a corporation, a used concession they're called, and you get the corporation with the concession for any amount at least equal to 1 lira. You cannot buy a certificate if you own the maximum number of certificates allowed, which, I don't know where we have that. Starting share prices, somewhere we have it. It's a per player thing. I don't know where it is. But, here we go. So 8 players, you're allowed 9 certificates. And the president's certificate counts as 1. In 3 players, you're allowed 21 per. At 6, you're allowed 11. It sounds about reasonable with other XX games. Okay. Now, you're only allowed to hold 60% of a corporation. However, there's a modifier to the certificate limit. And I think this is the thing I was talking about. Maybe I'm not seeing it right now. Okay. If you want to start a new corporation, if it's a historical corporation in phases 2 or 3, you must have an unused concession which can be acquired during the concessions round at the beginning of the game, or you can buy it during the stock round. And you do the following sub-steps. Now, that's only with the historical corporations, and there's a list of those, which is not on this page. You choose the class of the corporation, minor or major, that you want to start, if it's a non-historical corporation. The historical corporations are tied to a location and tied to a specific class. But otherwise, you get to choose from the the corporations that are available, and you'll be able to pop them up largely anywhere on the board. Not quite. Okay. After you decide the class, you choose one of the corporate charters of the right class. Then you set the price of the corporation. And these are starting values. A little multiplier chart for you. Starting values and how many shares you want. And the starting values are these little red zone squares here. The two over here cannot be used for minor corporations. If you're starting a minor corporation, you have to start at a lower starting cost. You can see there's a lot of disparity between those costs. The money for each certificates bought from the initial offering is going to go into the company treasury. Note that there's no par value or anything like that over on the chart, and that I think is a factor. The corporation sells its certificates at the current market price, which makes sense. You don't have any arbitrage going on, which is always kind of an interesting situation in an XX game. Somehow I largely disbelieve in the ability of it, but IPOs and stuff sometimes make a lot of money right off for the investors. So I don't know. I don't know which way to go with that. Okay. After you set that market price, then you must buy yourself the president's certificate. And if you bought a major if you started a major corporation, up to 2 regular certificates, in which case you can hold up to 40% of the corporation right away. And you pay that cash into the corporate treasury, you get the certificates, and the other certificates can be bought at current market value by any players, including the president, when they get their regular stock buying step. The money goes into the corporate treasury. That player remains the president as long as no one else has a larger holding of stock in that corporation. But historical corporations, you remain the president as long as you're the person holding, the concession attached to that corporation. The concession gets used up and permanently attached to the corporation. And I believe these concessions are tied to a specific corporation. So you bid on the concession that you want the corporation for. They may have some they do have some special abilities as well. Okay, the next thing you do after you purchase that initial load of stocks, however many it is the corporation is allowed to buy tokens that it can use throughout the game. Normally in an XX game, corporations come with a pile of tokens and they can spend cash to place them throughout the course of the game. This one works very differently. Here you make the decision how many cities your corporation is going to tokenify or block or whatever you want to call it as railheads at the point at which you start it. And you're going to pay based on the stations that you have. Now, if it's a major corporation, let's see. On a minor corporation, you're allowed to buy 1 or 2 tokens. In a major corporation, you are allowed to buy between 2 and 5 tokens. The historical corporations, are spelled out here, and the basis that their tokens start at is also spelled out on this chart. So the SFLP, which I believe is a minor, let's see if I can find it. It's going to be hard. There's the SFLP. It's indeed a minor. It has 1 token that's going to start in Luca. And we find Luca, and that's where that company is going to start. And it'll be running down here. there's stuff there. Okay. Some of them, like the IRSFF, starts in Milan and Venice. That's got its problems. Because those are... no, initially they're both in Austria. Okay. Okay. You can never select Lugano. It's in Switzerland, and in fact, there can never be a token there because corporations aren't allowed to cross borders. But the borders change. You can't select an Austrian city until after the Ferdinand secession has occurred. And Austria has a moving border. It starts here and then moves back into just Venice. And then it loses Venice as well. Milan, Venice, Torino, Alexandria, Queno, Firenze, Lucca. These are the starting cities for the historical companies. They can't be selected until the fourth phase of the game. The fourth phase is, I believe, the fortress. And at that point, they become free game. If a major corporation has two bases, they cannot be separated by an active border, i.e. they both have to be in the same country. The historical corporation, the tokens cost 50 lira each, just a flat sum. So if you want to buy 5 of them, there's 250 lira you pay from your initial, and now your tokens are paid for. You're allowed to place them for free later. They don't really cost anything to upgrade. To put on the board. And they may come off as well, which is kind of weird too. Non-historical corporations, the price of the tokens depends on the bases selected. If the base does not have any tile within 2 hexes of it, the tokens cost 25 lira. If they do not have any tile within 1 hex, they cost 50. And if they do not have a tile in their hex, no, if it does have a tile in its own hex, the tokens cost 100. No, I'm sorry. If they don't have a tile... So, okay. If they don't have anything within 2 hexes, they cost 25. If they don't have anything next to them, they cost 50. If they don't have a tile in their own hex, they cost 100. And if they have a tile in their hex, they cost 200 lira. Pre-printed tiles, though, for example, this city here, only counts if they have track that's been built. Let's see. Yeah, that here. Pre-printed tiles only count if they're connected to a railhead, where tiles on the other side of an active border do not count. So if you run track to the edge of the border, it's not going to count as an exchange point that would cause this penalty. So you could actually... We'll have to see how it works out. But, yeah. Okay. When the stock round ends, priority deal passes as it usually would to the last person, or to the first person who passed in any order, sequence of passes. The current market value of all the corporations with any shares in the bank pool drops by 1 row. That's new. The current market value of all corporations with no shares in the bank pool goes up by or in the initial offering, goes up by a row. That's standard, 1830 at least. All unused concessions still in the possession of a player get taken away from the player and put back in the bank pool, available for purchase in the next stock round. You bid on things, you better plan on using them. If you make a sealed bid and you bid on a lot of things in the hopes of getting one, you might end up with like 4 of these and no capability to use them all, and that would be terrible. So you don't want to spread your bid too widely. That's why there's an option for, and this is standard in the version 2, I believe, for using a normal auctioning round for these concessions. That may make more sense for me, although there's something really interesting about the sealed bids in terms of you don't know what the game's going to start like. You can't predict it. It doesn't fall the same way that the auctioning of these certificates or the serpentine or whatever handout that 35 uses, which allows you to kind of see, yeah, if I take this one, then I get this one. And, all that kind of thinking, that goes out the window when you're using sealed bids. So it's pretty interesting. You might end up with nothing. Is that terrible? Not really. You have cash. You lose a turn. And that could be a big deal. This game has some real weirdnesses to it where losing a turn might be huge, actually. But, okay, let's see what else we have. So, the Bayard gets 20 lira. And this will be eliminated at the beginning of phase 4 of the game along with other concessions. Now, the Bayard is the one that doesn't get sent back to the bank pool. And this is not linked to a corporation. It just gives you money at the end of each stock round. Certainly worth a 20 bid, right? You make that back the first time. It's going to be hard to remember not to dump that, though. That's going to be weird. Okay. During the stock round, the token, each time you sell, the token drops around a row for each certificate sold. And we went over most of this. Okay, when the corporation declares a dividend that's greater than the current market value of the corporation, it moves forward, moves right one space. If it declares a dividend that doesn't meet that and is non-zero, it stays where it is. This is even if so there's going to be a concept of paying out half like there is in 1870. You can pay half, and if you're still above this, you go forward a space. Only one. It's not like, the 1829 where you can jump across the board. I played one recently, the 1860, I think, has that very fast-moving track where you can get multiples of your market value and just shoot right up. And finally, if you pay 0 or you withhold your holding, your payout, you fall to the left of space. But remember, certificates in your initial offering pay back into the treasury. So there might be good reason to pay out in general. There's probably going to be less reason to swallow in this game. They go over kind of standard ordering. There's one little weirdness in this which is handled in the clarifications, which has to do with when when certificates are sold at the same time, they're sold in a manner that will reverse their order in a stack. But that's a pretty minor thing that I don't want to go into too much detail with. I don't think it's going to be a big factor in the game. You have your limits to how many certificates you can hold. Corporations themselves are allowed to hold 5 certificates that don't count against any players holding. However, I don't believe they can hold any of their own certificates, and they can never buy them back, which kind of pisses me off, because corporations do often make an offer to pull their own certificates back into their control. Change of presidency. Okay. So this is in general your normal 18xx rules for change of presidency. If someone ends up with more certificates than the president's certificate is exchanged for 2 of that person's shares, and they're the new president and they get to run the company, the corporation. The exception to this is if you're on a historic corporation, the concession holder holds the presidency forever. Even if another player has larger stock holdings, and I believe, yeah, the president's certificate has to follow the concession. So any deals that arrange selling that concession have to allow for the president's certificate to move along with the concession. The president's certificate can never be in the bank pool, with one exception, which is frozen companies, which are sort of like receiverships. There are conditions in which the certificates can end up forced to be sold into the bank pool, and then the corporation is in a different status. We'll get to that. But in general, the presidency, once it's held by a player or corporation, yes, corporations can hold presidencies and other corporations, will remain in a player or corporation's hands for the rest of the game. Okay. Antitrust law, you're not allowed to hold more than 60% of a corporation in your own hand, in your player's hands. And this includes corporations you control as president. So your interlocking holdings can't sum up to more than 60% of any given corporation. That's going to be hard to keep track of. I'm going to take a little break here because I think this one's going to take me several little periods to go through. There's 20 pages of rules, and I'm halfway through, but there's a lot of specifics coming up later. I've added my reading glasses on top of my glasses, and even with them, it's not trivial. I mean, I can read everything, but man, it's such tiny print. Okay, during the operating round, you're allowed to lay one or more track tiles. One in general. Some companies get to do more, though. You get to place a token, run your trains. This is pretty standard. Purchase a token from another corporation. That's new. You're able to cut deals to buy tokens that other people have. It doesn't give you an extra token. By the way, I went and sorted out the tokens. There's an extra one. Basically, there's a choice between using a square or a circle token over on the bank pool chat. I'm going to use the extra ones for certain markers during play, so I'm leaving them out there to help record who buys corporations first. And I've also put the extra ones on these. These are the associated historical companies. Then you're allowed to buy trains, sell corporate stock to the bank pool, buy corporate stock from the bank pool or from initial offerings from other corporations, start a new corporation. This is during your operating round. Your corporation can start another corporation, or merge with another corporation of the same general class. And finally, if you're a minor corporation, under certain restrictions or conditions, you're allowed to change into a different major corporation. Yeah. Okay. The president mainly gets to decide what to do, as in any XX game. And that's about it. All right, track laying. So each corporation that's operating can lay one track tile. At first, you can only play yellow tiles, and then as you go through the different eras, you can go up to green and then orange rather than brown, but they refer to it as brown in here. Yeah, nothing too exciting here. They're very careful with their wording to make sure they don't make any ambiguity whatsoever. And it does make it kind of a hefty rule set to read compared to others. Okay. So They consider these small cities. Now, this is interesting, and we're going to see Boinker Doinkers maybe treated a little differently. We're going to see how they go. Medium cities are normal circles. Large cities have a Y on them. They're going to upgrade to something bigger. The Apennine passes have a small mountain on them, which I assume is these. I'm trying to see. Alpine passes have a circle with a large mountain on it. Ah, these guys. Okay. And that is slightly larger. Mainly it's darker. Okay. And they're going to have a very high cost. You see 200 lira to move through there, whereas these have 100, which is pretty hefty on their own. And, you know, there's upgrade costs for other mountains as well. Milano, Torino, Genoa, and Venezia are special cases which have special upgrades, and they're these. Firenze is just a normal Y, though. It's just it starts as yellow. And then there's appendices that list all the available upgrades to make it easier. We'll look at the tile alignment during play. I don't think there's any big shocks in this set, but I'm not sure. We'll see. Normal rules, you have to be able to run over part of the new track in order to lay it, and you have to match the track that's already there, etc. You cannot lay track across any border during phase 2. I'm not quite sure what that means. So this is 4.11. Let's see. I know what phase 2 means. That's, well, the 2 trains are there. Track may run off the hex grid into either a port or off map box without this. Okay, we got a lot of things marked 4.11. Really, what I'm assuming it means is that if I build track up to the border, I can't keep building across the border. But I can build right up to the border. Okay. All right. Certain green tiles are not used as replacements for yellows, but are placed on specific yellow hexagons. The Apennine Pass tiles, these guys are going to upgrade to green, so you can't even build them until you get to phase 3. And tiles which are specific to some of the cities will also be penalized that way. Firenze looks like, since it starts yellow, it's going to be upgraded that way. There are also brown tiles, which are not used as replacements for green tiles, but are placed on specific green hexagons of the board. These are Alpine Pass tiles, which say Sempione and Frejus Pass, which are these two. So those have brown tiles which place over them. I'm not sure. I think this dark green is just to indicate Venezia, but we'll see. It's hard with these glasses, I have to tell you, but it's easier than reading, but it's hard for me to see the rest of the board easily. Okay. When you lay tokens, you don't have to actually pay for a token when you lay it, but you have to follow normal XX token laying rules, i.e. trace a line, a legitimate track line from one city where you have a token to a city where you do not, and put the token in the one that does not. And as normal, it prevents trains from running through those cities unless they're double cities or whatever. And it becomes your base that you can run trains out of. Now, at the start of the game, you have 1 or 2 tokens placed on base cities. And base cities for non-historical corporations are determined by the president during the corporation's starting step of the stock round. Yeah, we hit that. Any additional tokens that you bought at the beginning of when you floated the company, you're able to put in medium, large, or special cities that are permitted. And you're also allowed to put them in the Apennine and Alpine passes, which aren't really cities, but they block the way cities do, in the sense that you can put your token there. So when you're counting up how many tokens you need to start your company, think about what mountain passes you're going to need to go through. You can't lay tokens across an active border into another country, which means you can never lay a token up here, even though there's going to be a circle city there. Okay, then you get to run your trains. From what I can remember, this works largely the way normal train running works, with some provisos as to what cities count and what do not. So you have to go through a city occupied by your starter, and you have to touch a city occupied by your token. It has to be a city. It can't be a pass. The number on the train card shows how many cities it hits, and that'll count as both cities and passes. You may not run through a city without stopping. You have to score the city if you run through it, which means it counts both against your train limit and against the number of cities you can hit. You can't bypass things. Okay. The passes count as zero-valued cities when you're establishing your route. Now, I know for a fact that ports don't count. You're able to hit ports without counting them, but red cities, these red terminal points, count against what you can hit. And I thought towns were free pass-throughs as well, but they're called cities in this game, which so far, let me see. I swear I saw something that led me to believe that. Let's take a look at 4.3 over here in the clarifications and see. This is hard to find too. A legal route must include a city in particular. All right, I'm not. More clarifications. Yeah, this isn't exactly the easiest way to look into the rules. All right. Passes and ports don't count as cities for this purpose. Small cities and ports are free. This is stated here, and this is as an error. It's in here somewhere. I remember reading it. So these small cities don't count against you for running through them any more than ports do, which is kind of interesting. So towns, we'll call them towns to differentiate them. Towns and ports don't count against you in terms of your train distance. And we've seen other games where there have been versions of that. It's just, all right. Then you count up your revenue that you collect from each point that you connect through. And like in most XXs, if somebody points out a higher revenue route that you could be set for your trains that you could be using, you must use it, but nobody actually has to state that if they don't want to. And then you have the choice between paying out or swallowing, or apparently paying out half. Yeah, remember to pay out half. I guess not. Okay. Well, if you pay out, everything goes to the earners. If you swallow, it all goes into your company stock, your company treasury. And I swear there was some place where they talked about half payments over here, which may be something that's an anomaly, or maybe I'm not seeing something, because it is a really tough set of rules to find your way through. So somewhere I have stock valuation. At the end of a stock round, every time a corporation declares a dividend, moves a column to the right. Huh. Okay. I don't know where I got half payments from. Whatever. We'll ignore that. Somehow I imagined that. But it's definitely not here and it's not there. So, all right. So the next step, you're allowed to buy a token from another corporation. You have to pay at least one. You have to have a token available that you've already purchased. And you simply pay the corporation the money, they remove their token, and you get yours in the same place. You can't double up in the same city this way. You get nothing special there. Then you're allowed to buy trains, and the costs are there. You can see we get quite high for the 8 train. That's an expensive 7s and 8s. That's in the diesel range. But these guys aren't too bad. Prices look a little high, though. I've heard the trains come out pretty hard in this if players are doing things right. Like somebody will... there's good reason to push the trains for players. And we'll see how that works out. If you have more trains than you're allowed, you have to dump them into the bank pool, and then they become available as low-cost possibilities, but they don't affect this order. So if people keep buying from here, they can cause the train progression to go forward. You can buy trains from other corporations for anything at least equal to 1 lira. All right. If your corporation has no trains, and it has to have a train, and the rules for having to have a train are a little different here. If the company is operating, it must have a train unless there's no route available for which it could possibly run. That would be pretty hard to do if it's operating, doesn't mean it actually is hooked up. So yeah, that's the must be hooked up. Otherwise, the corporation begins a turn without a train, it must purchase one during that turn. Well, if you have to purchase a train and you don't have one, and you don't have enough cash to buy the cheapest train available from the bank, and you don't have the ability to buy one from another corporation for whatever reason, then the corporation starts selling off its own treasury certificates, whatever it's got in its treasury, for only half value. And then it sells its initial offering for only half value until it has enough money to buy a train. And then it's allowed to continue buying trains. So if it wanted to buy from another corporation, if it has an extra buck or something, it could do that. The money collected is added to the corporate treasury, and the certificates sold are put in the bank pool. If there's still not enough to buy the cheapest train, whatever owns that corporation, which could be a player, could be another corporation, then has to make up the money out of its treasury and then its stock holdings if need be, or out of its pocket and certificate holdings. Now, if you still don't have enough and you've gone all the way up to depleting the player's legal sales, the player has to declare bankruptcy. And he discards all his stock certificates into the bank pool, gaining for each certificate half of its value and giving that money to the currently operated corporation. And then the activities of the currently operating corporation are now closed for the current operating round. It doesn't have to buy the train until its next operating round. If a shareholder currently gets the presidency, they now are the president of that corporation, and on the next operating round, they may have to buy a train for it. The bankrupted player gets 500 lira immediately and is allowed to continue the game. However, they'll be in debt 500 off their final victory conditions. They could also leave the game if they choose. Now, I think there are special rules somewhere as to when. So there's times when you can sell beyond your limits in certificates, and I feel like this is one of them. But anyway, let's keep going and we'll see if we hit that. A corporation is frozen when its president certificate's in the bank pool. It does not perform any game activity except at the end of the stock market round, its token loses 2 rows instead of 1 for having that it would normally be penalized for certificates in the bank pool. And in its operating round, the market value token goes back 2 columns instead of 1. It's really, in such a receivership type situation that it looks horrible until somebody's willing to actually start investing in it. Now, investing in it doesn't mean they're putting money into the corporate treasury, so they're not actually making it any healthier. It's just that the price has gotten so low that it's worth buying that crap and trying to save it, perhaps. All right. I need to look a little bit more into this because I believe this may be the place where a corporation, other than by bankruptcy, this may be a situation where the presidency or over 50% or something can end up in the bank pool. I found that exception. During the sub-step, you can put more than 50% during the emergency money raising. More than 50% can go in even president certificates if corporations are selling off shares. And in fact, if players are too, however, I believe the player cannot sell, I don't know if it's any of the corporations that do this issue. Yeah, you're not allowed to sell stock certificates of the currently operating corporation. And as with the corporate money that's raised in the emergency situation, you also only get half the value of the certificate. So this doesn't look like a good move to engineer a train failure. It looks like it's penalized in this game in a way that it's not in most XX games. Okay, purchasing the actual train, the biggie here is, hey, what happens in the different stages? So in phase 2, we have yellow tiles. The off-board regions pay the white section. The Swiss border is in use. I think all the borders are in use is what this is saying. So we're using this border for the Austrians, and this little thing's kind of just a weirdness because everything's not completely, there's some divisions that, there's like a tiny little territory here. And this border, which is here, is also in use. So I guess there's actually a border between Venice. Well, let's look at this one. Okay, the double border is not in use, I think. I don't know. Let's see. Let's see what they say. All right. So when you enter phase 3, the green tiles are available. There's 2 operating rounds. Companies can now lay tiles across borders. The corporations can, but they can't lay tokens across borders. Non-historical corporations can be started as long as they're not in Austria or the Swiss territory. You're restricted to only starting the historical corporations, the ones that start off these, before this. And a major corporation with 2 or more bases on the map is allowed to lay 2 tiles in each operating round. Now, did we skip subsequent track laying? Yeah, I think we did. So each base that it has beyond the first allows it an extra space during phase 2, an extra track lay, and only 1 extra tile during phases 3 and 4. Now, you can't double build on a single. You can't like build a track and upgrade it immediately during using those 2 actions, and they have to come from different bases. So you're building out of the different bases, presumably to hook them up, but we might see what happens. Okay, in phase 4, the conservative zone border is eliminated. This is the conservative zone back here, I believe. No, that's the Piedmont-Tuscanian border. Here's the conservative zone border, I guess. Going along here to the south here, I guess. All the concessions still in play are removed from the game, along with their related inactive historical corporations. If you don't start a corporation that's historical, by this point, it goes away. And that means that other corporations are free to start in the historical corporation starting place. Of course, nobody thought that was worth having, so it may still not be terribly worthwhile. The Austrian possessions fall back to Venice alone. So I think all these gray borders are going away. Yeah, that's what it looks like. They all go away at the start of phase 4. And you can see they're gone there. And we've got what I think is this double border instead. And maybe the conservative zone and Austrian are connected, actually. I'm not sure. I know they are in one of the variants. A player can start new corporations in the Austrian territory. Of course, they still can't cross the border. 2 trains are eliminated. Major corporations are down to 3 trains each. We're up to the middle value here. Something called the Ferdinandea secession is performed, which we'll get to in a little bit. And the Tuscanian merge is performed. So those things all happen when phase 4 breaks. All kinds of interesting stuff. This is kind of like phase 5 and the 5 trains in most games in terms of a lot of stuff going on. When phase 5 starts, the Austrian possessions are completely eliminated. Brown tiles are available. 3 trains are eliminated from the game. Wow, that's a quick train race, right? Usually that goes with the 6s. 3 operating rounds per game turn, and major corporations are down to 1 tile each operating round. Starting with phase 6, we're now up to the highest value here. Minor corporations can only have 1 train, major corporations only 2. No trains die, though, at this point. So this is kind of a weird train fall. With train 7 coming out, the 4 trains die. Yeah, that's really hurrying things up, isn't it? Surprised the 2s don't die on the 3s. With phase 8, the 5 trains die. Ouch. We have an extra level of train in there, though. And the market value tokens are allowed to enter into the light blue area. Otherwise, they're restricted from doing so. What's the yellow area? That's available only to the major corporations, I believe. Okay. If you end up with excess trains, they get thrown in the bank pool. Okay, special rules. The Ferdinand's Concession. This is the IRSFF major corporation. It's eliminated at this point. It's this one. It's eliminated at this point and separated into 2 minor corporations, the Veneto SFV and the Lombardia SFL. That's these 2. You can't start these, they're historical. We'll get to the SFLI in a moment. And what essentially happens is they get divided by territory, where the Venetia gets all the stuff in Venice, and the Lombardy gets whatever's over in Lombardia. This is because this is happening in phase 4, I believe, when Venice loses this territory. And each of these corporations gets 2 tokens. And there's rules for how they get allocated. The trains are allocated first over to the SFV, which is, I think, the Venetia side. The money is divided up between the 2 factions, with 90% going over to Venetians. The treasury certificates are divided between the corporation, with the highest valued certificate going to the SFV and the second to the SFL, etc. The ones that are in the corporate treasury get divided up that way. Each shareholder, beginning with the president and going to his left, exchanges a pair of IRSFF certificates, or the presidency, for an SFL or SFV certificate, or with a presidency of one of the 2 new corporations. For one SF, so they get both certificates, or they get the presidency of one of the 2, and obviously the SFV is the better of the 2. Until all the certificate couples have been exchanged. A shareholder exchanges all his couples before the next player gets his chance. Each pairing in the bank pool will be given 1 of each. Each remaining IRSFF shareholder, beginning with the president and going to his or her left, exchanges his or her remaining certificates for 1 of either, player's choice, subject to availability. The IRSF certificate remains in the bank pool and is now substituted with an SFL or SFV at the president's choice. Each remaining SFV and SFL certificate is put into the initial offerings, if they were any that didn't get allocated. The presidency is now shifted as need be to make sure the proper president is in charge. And this will go clockwise. I do clockwise, counterclockwise. And then the IRSFF is eliminated from the game. It will not be back. The Tuscan merge depends on how many Tuscan corporations are present. So there's a number of Tuscan corporations. The SFLP, that's this green, which will be down here. The SFMA, which is the red historical. And the SSFL, which is this one here. I think only the historical ones count. Okay. If only one of those or none of them exist, there's not going to be a merge. If the SFLP and SFLMA exist, the SFLP is transformed into a major corporation, and then you do a major corporation merger between the two. Basically, a new corporation appears there that's not historical. If the SFMA and SSFL exist, the SFMA turns into a major corporation, and then a regular major corporation merger happens. I'm sorry. This is going to turn you into the SFLI over here. It's not going to be just a random corporation. It's going to be the historical merge. But it's reserved for this. And if all three exist, first the two minors are merged into a major corporation as though they're regular minor corporations. And then the regular major corporation merging occurs between the two corporations that remain. This creates the SFLI. It'll always have 5 tokens, 2 of which have to be placed in Pisa and Firenze. And the other can be either substituted for Tuscan corporation tokens already on the map or put in the token pool. It doesn't say whether or not that's at any option. It's possible there could be more tokens than the corporation could hold, and it's also possible that you might not want some there and might want flexibility. It's not absolutely clear which way that is intended to go. The corporations are eliminated, and then the merges are performed by the president of the corporation who has the greatest value. He makes any decisions there involved in the mergers. Okay. Financial step. So that was buying trains, and for whatever reason they decided to put that into the buying trains section. And now the next step is this financial step. And the corporation is allowed to sell stock. It can sell one or more of its corporate stock certificates, either both from its treasury and from its initial offering, at the current market rate into the bank pool. Quick way to raise some cash. This decreases the value of the stock, though. You cannot sell if you haven't operated yet, or if this is your first operating round, or if this would knock you up to 50% of that corporation in the bank pool. The stocks in the bank pool are now available to purchase, and all sales of stock and purchases are made at the current price on the stock market. The bank pool cannot contain more than all the penalties there. If you're forced, because of say the 60% limit, to sell certificates from your treasury at this point, you must do so, and you end up getting paid full price with it. It's just treated as a normal stock sale. You cannot be forced to sell these certificates if it's illegal to do so, though, unlike the other forced stock sale. The president's stock certificate may not be sold at this point, but it can be disposed of as it normally would if somebody's ready to take it over. If a corporation, for some reason, has more than 5 certificates, it has to dump one. And if it's holding any certificates of a corporation that owns it, it has to sell them. This is to prevent a circular chain of corporations, which can happen. There's an option in here to prevent it from happening in the little fact book or whatever. Then the corporation is allowed to use its corporation money to buy a stock certificate of another non-controlling corporation from the bank pool, or from the initial offering, and the money goes where you'd expect. It cannot buy the certificate if the corporation already has the maximum number of certificates, or if it just sold that corporation's stock immediately beforehand, or if it puts one player over 60% holding in a corporation with all their, hierarchy of corporations. Corporations can become presidents of other corporations. It can never put its own certificates in its treasury, and it can never restore certificates to the initial offering. Which means once a corporation is sold out, it will not get money from running off its own certificates, but it can get it off of other corporations' certificates. This is weird. I think corporations should be able to buy up their own shares and, in fact, freeze them and prevent them from being released, a la 1870. But I don't know. There are no designer's notes that explain that decision, as is usual in 18XX. Corporations can also start a new corporation. This follows very much like the player starting a corporation. The corporation cannot have bought a certificate in this round. The new corporation will operate in the next operating round. During the current operating round, the new corporation cannot be merged with another one. The act of corporation does the following. First, it decides the class, major or minor. And yes, you can have a minor corporation start a major. Then you choose a non-historical corporation, because you don't have one of these to engage the corporation with. And remember, these corporations disappear when the concessions disappear. You set its value, same rules as before. You emit stock the same way. You're allowed to buy of a minor just the president's certificate. Of a major, you're able to hold up to 40% in your corporation. You purchase tokens. I think tokens may cost differently here. Nope. Same prices for a player starting a corporation. And if you select two bases, this works with the player starting a corporation. All your tokens cost the higher cost for tokens. Like all your potential tokens that you're going to be able to lay during the turn. All right, then we follow a merging step. You can merge one of your corporations with another corporation. If you have a major, you can merge it with another major, as long as the two corporations agree. And there has to be a non-historical major corporation available to start, i.e. not, they can't all be out in players' hands. If it's a historical major corporation, the related concession has to have been eliminated or never have existed. The SFLI doesn't have, it's a historical corporation, it doesn't have a concession. These two don't have a starting concession either. But they're minors, so we won't be talking about them yet. But there's something similar. There's a similar rule for the minors. Both corporations have to have operated once. They have to have if you had a hypothetical train, it would have to be able to move from one to the other, i.e. the track has to be connected and not blocked off by a dot. That train can be any size, I would guess. Doesn't state that specifically. But so then the president chooses the new corporation. He substitutes the new corporate charter for the old ones. All possessions of both corporations go into it. If the new corporation has some of the old corporation's certificates in its treasury, these certificates can just be eliminated. He puts the market value token of the new major of the new major corporation in the rightmost space over on the track, the price track, whose value is lower than the sum of the market values of the two corporations that merged, and is lower than 250 lira. 250, trying to see if that's an interesting value. It really isn't. It's just a line kind of going down through here. I thought it might be one of these walls. However, if at least one of the old corporations was already above 250, you can boost the price of the new shares up to the higher of the two. You're losing some share value this way, though. If you don't make the combination, if you don't get the full price value addition off of it, you're going to lose share value by doing this. Each old corporation shareholder is now allowed to exchange old corporate certificates for the new ones at the rate of 2 old certificates for 1 new one. Any odd certificates are exchanged for either half the market value of the new corporation, dropping fractions, and the bank will pay you the money, or you can pay half the cost to get a certificate of the new corporation if one's available when it comes around to you. The bank pool will always discard any odd certificates, but they exchange any that are not odd because there's people holding those. You can substitute up to 5 old tokens with new tokens wherever they are, if they're on the map or in the pools or whatever. And it looks like you have the choice of doing this, so I think the other one it does as well, just to be consistent. The old major non-historical corporations show up again. People can start them. Any historical ones are eliminated from the game. A new major corporation gets to operate starting the following operating round, and that's a general rule. Whenever a corporation shows up, it's not allowed to, during an operating round, it's not allowed to operate that round. There is a special option in here for the SFLI to run if none of its component parts ran. But it's an option, and I don't think we'll play with that. I don't know enough about the game for that to make a difference, but apparently there's a quirky little thing that can happen if you don't allow that. All right. Minor corporations merge exactly the same way. Except I believe they turn into a major corporation. Yeah, they turn into a major corporation. And I think the rules are pretty much exactly the same. Minor corporations are able to turn into major corporations if the related concession is gone, the market value is currently all the way on column K, which should be this one. Yeah, no minor corporations beyond this column. All right. See, I thought there were certificates that don't count towards your limit. Maybe I just skimmed over it and didn't comprehend it, so I'll look for that at some point. The market value will stay the same. You get you take a non-historical major corporation. One has to be available for this, and you basically just replace your minor corporation with a major. Your shares are replaced. The old 40-20% certificates are replaced with 20-10% certificates. So now you have less shares. Well, not really. You have less of a percentage of the corporation. Your shares are worth exactly the same. Remember, minor corporation certificates are valued, like a 20% certificate is valued at the price value. The president's certificate is valued at twice the price value. So you're going to have the same stock value, you just have less ownership in the corporation. And then each shareholder has the option to buy a certificate at the current market price, putting the money into the corporate treasury. And then each player, starting with himself, has the option to buy another certificate until they run out, of course. All the remaining certificates go into the initial offering. All the old tokens are replaced with new tokens. If the old corporation had only one token, you must buy another token for 50 lira using corporate money. And then you're allowed to buy additional tokens at 100 lira each, up to your 5 limit. And then if the minor corporation was a ahistorical corporation, it's available for starting again. Oh. At the end of the game? Okay, well, when does the game end? Yeah, we forgot to talk about that. Okay. The game can end through a number of different ways. Player bankruptcy is not one of them. I seem to be missing things that I've read. Or remember reading, like how the game ends. Here's the game ends. If the bank goes bust, the game will end at the end of the current operating round. You play out the rest of the operating round, people get their cash. Not a whole set of operating rounds. If a stock certificate reaches 516 in value, the top of the chart, the game ends immediately at the end of that operating company. And so they get an extra turn basically over anybody, pretty much anybody else, since they're probably at the top of the track if that happens. And also, if each of the external boxes, these red things, is connected by a legal route to an onboard city. If you've connected all the external countries or whatever up to actual cities, then the game will end. And that happens, I believe, at the end of the operating round as well. All right. I'm sorry for how long this is taking, but it's the only way I can do it, and nobody else has anything. And I apologize that if you have to rely on me instead of wading through the rules yourself. And again, it changes with version 2, so if you have that, there are some differences. Okay. Geographic. We have some spelling out the different geographic sections. This is all actually covered already, and some of it is kind of like Luca here was independent for a while, but it doesn't affect the game. It's just some historical stuff. But it is kind of a shorter place to discuss the changes that happen when the game state changes happen. Series of optional rules include different border timing issues, depending on whether Napoleon III got his view for what should have happened in Italy, or Cavour did, or Wilhelm did, or the King of Piedmont. And I think we have one for the Austrians too. Yeah, Franz Joseph's. All that kind of show an ideal situation from any one of their point of view. And it gives you different scenarios that you can play out that give you a little variation to the game that wouldn't be otherwise available. They give an option for the priority deal card to be sellable, a la 1853. And then also, at the end of the last operating round, you can use that to force an additional operating round. I'm not going to do that. There's also an 1841 light, which uses gets rid of Tuscany and shortens the game a little bit. I don't know where this goes. I think this can't cut in there. I think this cuts in here. And there's some additional rules to shorten it. Then there's this that came with it, which sets a number of clarifications essentially in the first two sections in different forms. Some of them are, hey, the rules are clear enough, it's just they're not easy to find. Then some changes that they suggest, which I'm not going to do, but these may actually smooth the play. They're not going to get rid of, they might get rid of some weird situations that might happen if you're not careful. I don't want to screw with them yet. And then Tom Lehman was involved in this, and he really suggested some house rules. This may be the outcome of that because he's referenced in this as one of the people working on it. And then a set of variants, the concession round with an open auction. I don't know. I may or may not do that. I kind of like the idea of trying the bidding. SFLI runs in the round in which it is formed, as long as none of its components do so. That was the special case I talked about. Corporation cannot buy... Corporation may not buy shares of a corporation which have tokens in the other side of an active border. Corporations were able to invest cross-national. I know Italy's got some special legal situation for that, but I don't think that existed this early. So I'm not gonna go with that at all. And then they spell out some real big differences. Let me highlight these because I think restating these to myself after having read them to myself before, as well as pointing them out, helps show some of the big differences between this and 18xx other games. Minor company certificates cost the normal printed stock price. A route has to have at least 2 cities. Passes and ports don't count as cities. Small cities and ports are free to all. Trains can visit and count as many of them as they can reach. Passes, this is something I forgot to mention. Passes are free to the 8 train. By the way, the 8 train is absolutely limited. There's not a lot of them. There's 7 of them. It's a fair amount, but there's a lot of corporations and a lot of players and everything. If they run out, you're no longer required to buy a train. But, you know, running your corporation without a train doesn't really work well. The borders are spelled out here for the base game. Stock in a corporation may not be sold except on an emergency basis. Okay. That's to say, if you invest money from your corporation to another corporation, you can't get rid of that stock unless you have to. And when you have to, generally when you have to, you're going to have to sell it at half value if you're buying a new train, which is going to be painful. A corporation may not merge. Oh, I'm sorry. Stock in a corporation may not be sold. No, that's by anyone. So if I own shares of a corporation, I can't sell it either. And the corporation can't merge unless it's operated at least once. So yeah, I'm allowed to sell stock in the corporation. There's a step for that. Sorry. The corporation hasn't operated until it's finished its full first turn, including all the stock manipulation stages. So you can't say, oh, I ran my train and I paid out my dividends and now I get to do this stuff now. Tokens can't be laid across active borders, even if the destination country is in the same one from which the path is traced. So if you went through a border twice, you can't lay it. Token acquisition is often forgotten, where you can buy other corporations' tokens. Selling stock on emergency value only gives half the value, but it can result in the bank pool getting more than 50% of a corporation or the president's certificates. Corporations' earnings have to exceed their stock price to rise, and corporations have to start in cities. They can't start in passes. That's about it. Yeah, I know. Long set of introduction. I've been really looking forward to this game, and I think, it'll be worth the effort to get to it. I may regret having bought a cheap Lawson kit, or Larson kit, whatever. I can't remember his name. Lawson. That somebody didn't, pimp out. I picked up a copy of 18EU recently, and somebody did a beautiful job on it, laminating everything and everything. I wish I had the energy to go about that, but honestly, I'm more interested in the gameplay than anything else, and this looks like a serviceable solution to put a plexiglass on top of it. Otherwise, the board pieces will move around and everything. Alrighty, let's send this up.